if someone wants to end the mistreatment of animals in general, and how much does it really help if they just stop eating animal products? What difference does it make, as they'll say, well, I'm only one person? What do you say to somebody like that?
Yeah. Yeah, we hear this a lot. I'm just one person. My choices aren't going to matter. What I eat doesn't matter. I'm just one person. Well, what I would say to that is that it does matter. It absolutely matters, and on various different levels, it matters. And I would say that, first of all, just in the supply and demand, the basic supply and demand. So veganism really is a boycott. It's a boycott of a horrible and destructive and a terrible industry where animals suffer and the environment is decimated. So it's a boycott of the industry, right? And with any boycott, basically you're trying to reduce the demand, right? You want to reduce the demand. So that industry responds and they either reduce the supply or switch to something else, right? That's how supply and demand works. So, you may be just one person, but when you're going to the store and you buy the vegan fish fillets, that there's so many interesting new vegan fish products actually now that you can get. So you're buying that fish fillet and you grab a couple of those. And maybe you've taken the last one. Well, that tells the store clerk, these are selling. I'm going to buy more of these. So it really does make a difference, even if you're buying one or two products, because you're not the only one. There's a few other vegans out there that are doing that as well. And it increases that demand for the positive products, for the products that are less impactful on the environment, less impactful on animals. And it's going to be that much less fish that they bring into the fish case because you've bought the alternative vegan fish. So it certainly helps on that level, even though it doesn't feel impactful. Your $100 worth of groceries, it does make a difference. You've got, several vegan products in your cart. Yeah, you've made a difference there. So don't feel like it doesn't. And likewise, at a restaurant, especially if it's not a vegan restaurant and you're ordering a vegan meal, it increases the demand for that vegan stuff on the menu. And maybe they'll add 2 or 3 more when several vegans have asked for that 1 or 2 meals on options on the menu. So certainly matters in that way. And I will say that it matters on another level as well. And this is more kind of in the, more, I would say hopeful way. Okay. It's not so quantifiable as the supply and demand, but just living our lives as vegans, as compassionate people, as nonviolent people, that is going to make a difference in your interactions with people. And even if you don't necessarily tell someone you're vegan, if they see you buying the vegan product, you've made a difference there. Even if you don't necessarily have a conversation with someone directly about veganism, but you're talking about compassion to animals, you've made a difference there. So just having the ethos, the aura, I'll say, of being vegan and being nonviolent and living as close to our own of your own values, because anyone who is even considering vegan, then they value nonviolence. They value wanting to protect the environment. So you're living in line with your values, and that does reflect out. It reflects out to everyone you encounter, everything you do. So it might not be so quantifiable as the supply and demand, but there's unquantifiable benefit as well. So lots of levels.
Thank you very much for that, Hope. We've had a few hands raised, and so I'm going to jump now to Julie. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, thank you very much for taking my question. I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about how to answer the proponents of fish oil consumption in terms of the difficulties of people who were not breastfed in converting plant-based omega-3s to be more usable by their bodies, and also difficulties of older people converting plant-based omega-3s.
Well, okay. I will say that, I am not a health expert. My expertise is in behavior, the environment, the animals, things like that. The health aspects, I've done some research, but I haven't delved deeply in because it's not my expertise. I'm not a nutritionist. So what I would advise is to listen to the myriad of other people that are on this conference. There's so many amazing, very knowledgeable nutritionists and doctors and others in this conference throughout these few days of the conference. And I know that some of them will be talking about fish oil. I have a feeling. So that would be a great question for one of the nutritionists. There's a lot of wonderful information out there about all that. But it is my understanding, I'll just conclude by saying it's my understanding that the plant supplements. So, maybe there might be issue with, just saying, oh, I'm eating walnuts, so I'm getting enough omega-3s. Okay, possibly not. But these supplements are created to cover, to supplement what you need. So those plant-based supplements often are derived from seaweeds and other marine plants. So it's what the fish are eating to get the omega-3s, right? So there's definitely omega-3 in there. So those, I would say, if someone is really concerned, that they just need to do the plant-based supplements, because the supplements should give you what you need.
Thanks very much for that, Hope. And now we're going to go over to Benny. Welcome, Benny.
Hi, Hope. Thank you for such a great presentation. And slightly off of the fish, I've been hearing other people who are not in the vegan world talk about carbon neutral agriculture. Now it's necessary to have cattle on land in order to, well, I'm not exactly sure. It sounds like you know what it is, but basically to be better for carbon purposes. Is that true, or is there something I'm missing there? What's your comment about that?
Yes, well, what that is about is people that want to, how do you say it, have their meat and eat it too, or they're trying to find a better way to do a horrible thing, basically. So what you're talking about is it has a lot of different names. I mean, it's been called a bunch of different things, but now I think it's kind of landed on regenerative grazing. Regenerative animal agriculture is pretty much what the new terminology is now. And basically, I'll just kind of explain what they're proposing. What it is they say that, getting the animals out of the confinement buildings onto pasture and having huge areas of land where they've sectioned off different areas of this pasture, and they'll move a small herd of animals, ruminant animals, around so that they're just grazing in one little area, and then they move them after a few weeks or months to another area, and then that area that they just grazed can regenerate, sequester carbon, and so it's not as detrimental as like a CAFOS, a confinement feedlot operation, the big industrial. So that's the proposal. Unfortunately, scientifically, it just doesn't hold water. And there's been extensive studies on this. It's new as in that we're just now hearing about it and people are just now trying it in the US, but it's not really a new concept. And there has been about 3 decades of comprehensive study on these regenerative and short duration grazing methods. And there's just some basic problems, basic problems. One is that you need a much smaller number of animals and a lot of land, right? On a much larger area of land. And if land use is one of the problems, I mean, right now, land use for agriculture is one of our biggest issues. We use most of our arable land, land on the earth for grazing animals. And that is a problem. It's detrimental. It's degrading all the land, and we're having to. So basic math, basic problem. Smaller amount of animals for a larger area is not going to feed a lot of people. We'd have to have massive reduction of meat consumption. It's not going to feed the almost, what do we have now, 8 billion people on the planet. It's just not going to feed everyone. So that's some basic math. Then there's other issues that come into it too. It's not as self-contained as they propose. A lot of times there is grain that's grown with a lot of water, and grown in another area that's being trucked in as supplemental feed, especially in the winter time. The grass isn't enough, depending on what state they're in. I mean, there's so many issues going on here. And actually on my podcast, I have several podcasts that are focused on this. So if you want to get into some really great detail about this, I had Dr. Tushar Mehta break it down. Another gentleman, James O'Donovan from Ireland. They have this issue in Ireland, and he was breaking it down in Ireland, the same problem. I know this is a question and answer, so I don't want to get into too much detail, but basically, bottom line is that, this is something that everyone wants to believe is true, that we can have beef in some way and make it somewhat ecological. But unfortunately, we're actually finding that grass-fed beef can produce more greenhouse gases, and they drink more water. Because they're, moving around and out in the sun, so they're drinking more water. I mean, there's all kinds of issues. So it's not, unfortunately, the green superstar that everyone wants it to be. And there's a lot of detail to it. So I encourage you to look deeper into it, listen to some of my podcasts. But yeah, best is plant-based.
Thanks very much for that, Hope. And I guess that leads to this question, which is, does lab-grown meat end our problem of hurting animals? Does it end our problem of destroying the environment?
I don't really want to touch the lab-grown meat thing. There's so much that's big. That's even bigger than regenerative. I'll just say this. I have a really fascinating podcast coming up next on the 15th. It's my Earth Day special podcast. And I interviewed this wonderful gentleman, Kartik Shaker, who has written a book called After Meat. And it's all about the technologies that are coming out now, the interesting, fascinating new technologies for meat substitutes, for meat-free meats. And he has a really interesting take on lab-grown meat, and but his focus is on fermentation technology, and he's really into this fermentation technology. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff coming down the pipe. I'm not an expert in it all, and I don't know that I really want to get in the weeds there. I would say, please listen to my next podcast, because we get into it on my next podcast.